yourself hovering weightless, somewhere between surface and seafloor, where the sunlight spreads like a pale veil, and the water seems to hum with a hush. Everything moves slowly here. The waves above arrive as gentle patterns, like the steady breath of a sleeping giant. The reef stretches ahead like a quiet town, built in limestone, every contour softened by years upon years of patient accretion. The colours are muted in the late light, softened to milky blues and honeyed greys, with small touches of green and pearly cream where sand gathers. Even the sounds are delicate, faint pops from tiny creatures, the distant whisper of water sliding along ridges, and a soft shiver of life going about its steady business. Imagine yourself gliding closer to a coral colony. At first it appears like a single organism, a boulder or branching grove of bone-white stone, tinted by delicate living tissue. But as you drift nearer, you notice many small, round mouths waiting quietly, each one circled by soft tentacles that curl and relax like a sleepy hand opening and closing. Each mouth belongs to a polyp, a tiny animal related to sea anemones, set in a shared skeleton with neighbours, connected by a thin living skin that spreads across the stony surface like a quilt. The polyp is simple and elegant, a small cylinder with a mouth at the top, tentacles around the rim, and a foot that sits on the skeleton it secretes. This skeleton is made of aragonite, a crystalline form of calcium carbonate, and over a lifetime it becomes a carefully arranged terrace of cups and walls, ridges and spines, each element shaped by slow secretion. It is not dramatic, it is not loud, it is a patient architecture, built a breath at a time, a day at a time, a season at a time, gathering minerals from seawater and shaping them into a framework that can last for centuries. If you tilt your head and imagine seeing into the hidden world beneath the polyp, there is a narrow space where the building happens. The coral quietly pumps ions, moving calcium and carbonate into a micro-environment just beneath its soft tissue. There, in stillness, little crystals begin to grow. The tissue lays them down with care, like placing grain after grain of smooth sand, but in a crystalline order, so that over hours and days, minute after minute, the ridge rises, the cup deepens, and the colony increases in thickness, height, and breadth. From a small speck at the beginning, the colony spreads, budding new polyps, each one repeating the gentle craft of its ancestors, each one aligning with neighbours to keep the shape consistent, like a well-made blanket that grows from the centre outward, stitch by careful stitch. The water around you holds the ingredients, calcium ions drifting from dissolved rocks that rivers brought from the land, carbonate and bicarbonate born from a quiet dance between carbon dioxide and the sea's eternal buffering. The coral takes from this abundance with slow discretion. It is not greed, it is steady use. With the help of sunlight gathered by tiny photosynthetic partners living inside its tissues, the coral elevates its internal chemistry and tips the balance completes the cycle. Morning brightens, symbionts stir, the coral pulses lightly, and the tiny engines begin to hum. Ion pumps at the base of each polyp push, nudge, and balance the chemical pools, protecting the precise conditions that build aragonite rather than dissolve it. It is a delicate dance, but it has been performed for millions of years, practiced so thoroughly that each move seems effortless. The skeleton grows by microns and by millimeters, and the colony becomes heavier, thicker, more certain. A branching coral reaches upward and outward like a tree seeking gentle streams of light and flow. A massive coral expands like a rounded hill, step by step, until it seems like an ancient boulder, although it began as a single polyp no bigger than a grain of sand. Around you, there is more than one type of architecture. Coral forms are varied, each tuned to the way water moves and light falls. Some corals plait themselves into layered shelves that gather light like open hands. Some grow like big lettuce leaves that curl into pockets where fish sleep and crustaceans lounge. Others cling tightly to rock and keep low, encrusting the surface so that waves pass over them with little resistance. Branching forms create thickets for shelter, while large domes keep steadiness in high-energy places. The reef is a gallery of patient design, where each shape carries a story about currents, wave force, sun angle, and the subtle trade between being open to opportunity and being protected from storm. The coral is not alone. A thin, glistening layer of mucus coats its surface, like a fragile blanket laid down to keep dirt away and to smooth the path for tiny currents. This layer is a home for microbes that keep the coral's skin polished. In this cool, clear night water, the mucus carries away dust and fine sediment, and it also quietly feeds the colony and its microbial companions as it sloughs off. It is part of a slow cycle, an exchange between the coral and the sea it lives in, a reminder that even a builder as patient as this never truly works alone. It is joined by bacteria and archaea, by tiny living films that can fix nitrogen and share dissolved nutrients, by neighbors that do not speak but still support one another. The water's chemistry is a softly shifting canvas. When the sea is open and warm, its aragonite saturation is usually gentle and sufficient, a basin full of materials ready to precipitate. In this placid moment, imagine the ions drifting, bumping into one another, and occasionally finding a surface on which to settle. The coral provides that surface, and the proteins it secretes guide the crystals into appropriate shapes, not disorderly aggregates, but aligned arrangements that give the skeleton its strength. These molecules ease the formation of early mineral phases and then let them transform into the stable delicacy of aragonite, all under a mantle of living tissue that shields the newborn crystals from roughness and haste. You can almost hear the whisper of that transformation if you lean into stillness, a whisper like a soft exhale in a sleeping room. By evening, the day's work begins to round into tentacles extend more fully, brushing the water with a calm, deliberate motion. They feed on drifting plankton and small organic particles, not with a chase, but with a patient wait and a gentle capture. Tiny stinging cells sit in the tentacles, but it is a quiet exchange, a way to supplement the daytime gift from the algae with a nighttime meal from the passing water. Feeding brings nitrogen and phosphorus, essential for growth and for the symbiont's needs, and it complements photosynthetic sugars with proteins and more complex nutrients. In the dark, the reef appears to blossom as soft skeletons become softly feathered gardens where tentacles rise like little flowers, wavering in the nocturnal currents. This nocturnal feeding is not a frenzy. It is a slow, rhythmic behavior. Tentacles extend, pause, and retract in a pattern that matches the flow. The soft cilia lining the surfaces draw water past the mouths. Tiny food particles rest for a moment against sticky mucus surfaces and are passed inward in the quiet of the night, with only faint starlight filtering down as washed out rays of silver. You can imagine 1,000,000 mouths dining together, not in a hurry, but in comfort. If you close your eyes, you might hear the faint scattered clicks of snapping shrimp in the background, and the soft rasp of a small herbivore nibbling algae on the reef crest, distant and dreamlike. The reef itself is a building, but it is also a street, a plaza, and a labyrinth. There are cavities within the framework where water hides and rests, funneling nutrients in and out. Sponges pull water through their bodies, leaving it cleaner and subtly changed, the kind of quiet housekeeping that keeps the whole system balanced. Crustose coralline algae spread as purple-pink crusts across bare surfaces, secreting their own carbonate and cementing loose fragments. They are the quiet masons that seal the reef's edges and help glue broken bits into new structure. In the gentle tangle of these layers, small fish find sleeping niches, tiny crabs tuck into cracks, and the day's heat and bustle dissolve into evening calm. The building never truly stops, but it ebbs and flows. In the early morning, as the first light returns, photosynthesis stirs again, and the coral's internal pumps slowly reset the chemical spaces for growth. The coral invests in thickening and extending, and the colony's outer rings become stronger. Some days bring brighter light, some bring shade, and the growth responds subtly by adjusting how much energy moves into calcification, how much into tissue growth, and how much into maintenance. The coral's success is not measured in sudden leaps, but in years of steady persistence. If you float a little higher, you can take in the larger scene, and it looks like a vast city made of mineral and breath. There is the reef crest, where waves break and send bubbling plumes of aerated water down the grooves. There are spurs and channels cut by centuries of wave-driven current, guiding water in long parallel lanes toward the deep. Beyond, the forereef slopes down in steps and ledges, a terrace where light declines and the forms change. On the inner side lies the back reef and lagoon, where calmer water allows patches They come in distant seasons, find their energy broke across thousands of coral heads and millions of tiny ridges. Near the reef crest, the structure is a living breakwater. It rises just below the surface, maybe a meter or so down at low tide, catching the long energy of ocean swells and transforming it into foam and fizz. Here, corals are stout and sturdy, adapted to a push and pull that repeats all day. Their skeletons are heavy, their growth is dense, and in the shapes of their heads you see the memory of trials past and survived. In the calm lagoon behind this crest, sediments settle and the water warms, and small life thrives in quiet. The overall effect is like a softly made bed for the coast, a cushion that steadies all that lies behind it. The island itself, if one is nearby, may actually be a gift from this living structure, because the sand produced by reef life gathers and accumulates, creating beaches and cays that will cradle seabirds and low grasses, and sometimes human feet walking gently in the morning. The sand itself has a biography. Much of it is made grain by grain by the beak of a fish, with bright colours and a steady appetite. Parrotfish graze on algae that grow on the reef surface, and in doing so, they bite into the reef's crust. Their chewing mashes bits of calcium carbonate, which pass through their bellies and drift out as fine white sand. Each grain once belonged to a living framework, and through this gentle erosion, the reef releases building blocks back into the water, where currents carry them to new resting places. Other organisms add to the sand slowly. Sea urchins rasp with patient teeth. Boring sponges quietly dissolve small pockets with chemicals, and tiny worms nibble inside the skeleton. This is not destruction for its own sake. It is a balanced rhythm, growth and wear, building and reshaping, like the tide itself. As the reef grows up, sand grows down, and beaches gather on the quiet side, and dunes form, and new habitats rise from the water's edge. In this gentle world, the tide marks time. The water creeps in and out with a calm cadence. During low tide, near the crest, the sunlight is more intense and the flow is brisk, delivering fresh ocean water over the corals and carrying away wastes, bringing new particles to feed on in the night. During high tide, the water deepens and softens, giving the reef a brief rest from the strongest shimmering light, filtering it through a thicker layer. Moonlight does its own careful work. At certain phases of the moon and seasons of warmth and calm, many corals release their gametes into the water in great coordinated events. It is a gentle snowfall of living pearls, drifting upward or hovering in delicate bundles, rising to the surface in soft clusters. The ocean then becomes a cradle, where fertilized eggs develop into tiny planulae that drift like dust motes in a sunbeam. Their journey is patient, guided by currents and faint cues from the sea, from sound and smell and subtle tastes in the water left by algae and other life on good reef surfaces. After days or weeks, these little travelers settle when they find a welcoming patch of crustose coralline algae, which releases quiet chemical signals that say, softly and without fuss, wrinkles around itself, leaving narrow slits for growth, delicate spines radiating outwards as internal scaffolding. The animal is transparent and light passes through it, so the symbionts glow faintly with the green and brown of their pigments, and the first specks of living colour appear against the pale new rock. Over the next month, more polyps bud around the first one, and the colony takes a form set by the family line. The pattern of septa and ridges, the height of the walls, and the overall curvature are all written in the coral's memory. But even so, the environment carves the letters. In brighter water, the skeleton may be thicker and denser. In more gentle flow, the branches may reach further and spread wider. In shade, plates may thin to catch more light. The result is a living compromise between blueprint and site conditions, a conversation carried on in stone that you can witness with your eyes and fingertips if you were to run a hand over the cool surface. If you look around the reef's face, you see zones that repeat gently across many reefs, like the parts of a well-known lullaby. The lagoon inboard, protected and shallow, cradles soft bottom life. The back reef is patchy with coral heads and sand channels. The crest is loud with foam in the day, though quiet at night, and the fore reef slopes down with ledges that alternate light and shadow. Further out, where the slope steepens into blue, deep corals thicken their tissues and host symbionts tuned to dim light. Even there, growth continues, slower and more patient. There are corals that do not rely on light at all, far beyond. But here in this sleepy scene, we rest with the shallow, sunlit builders, where architecture and photosynthesis mingle with soft currents and hush. Across time, small changes accumulate. On long days, bright and warm, the skull of the reef becomes more massive. In spells of shade or suspended sediment, growth pauses and energy is put into maintenance. During sleepy parts of the year, when sunlight is a little lower and water is cooler or less clear, corals feed more at night and their energy budgets shift. None of it is sudden. The changes are gradual, like a whisper pressing slowly on a door. Over decades, the colony records these shifts inside the skeleton, each year leaving a faint band or density change, as either the crystals pack more tightly or lay down in softer, more open structures. Later, the reef builders who study reefs rate those bands like the rings of a tree, and with careful measures, they estimate past temperatures and clarity and growth rates. It is quiet science to match a quiet life, done with gentle cores and soft lights, with slow hands that respect the living structure. If you peer closely, you might notice faint fluorescences among some corals, especially when the sun is low or the moon is bright. These are proteins in the coral tissue that gently shift and soften the light, taking bright energy, making it calmer, and diffusing the shine through their pigments. They paint the tissue with faint greens and reds and oranges, not in a showy way, but as a subtle glow that helps protect the symbionts and allow the coral to balance light without stress. The effect adds to the tranquil feeling, as if the reef were lit from within by small lanterns that move with the swell. Flow is another painter in this quiet scene. Water movement delivers the raw materials for calcification, lightly brushes the surface, corals often grow more happily. Branching forms hold on to these small streams, channeling them between branches where the gulf of quiet water is balanced by slips of fresh flow. Massive forms allow water to wrap around them, with flows enriched by eddies that persist, enough to bring new molecules while maintaining the calm that the polyps prefer. As you drift, the reef's smell is faint but distinctive, like a clean mineral tang, with a whisper of salty sweetness near patches of seagrass at the edge. It is the smell of dissolved life, not overpowering, but present. Light changes once again, perhaps as a cloud passes over, softening everything further. Sand lifts in tiny puffs as a small goby shimmies into a burrow. A turtle glides past, trailing small eddies, leaving the water a little cooler in its wake. You stay still, and the reef sways around you to a rhythm that never hurries. And in that rhythm, building continues. The reef's patient architecture has a long lineage. Millions of years ago, ancestors of these corals tested shapes and symbiosis. The partnership with microscopic algae evolved as a quiet agreement that light could be shared, energy could be pooled, and skeletons could be built faster in bright, warm shallows. Those ancient reefs left behind fossils, now lifted into cliffs and mountains as white limestone that once was a living sea floor. Even now, if you touch certain smooth stones high on a hillside far from the sea, you are touching the memory of reefs that grew in tropical waters long ago. Their layers carry ancient light, and those delicate ridges and cups are like the persistent melody that carries through generations, steady, even, and sure. On more recent time scales, human eyes have watched these reefs and learned to see their subtle cues. In many places, careful monitoring tracks the slow growth of micro-atolls, those flat-topped corals that grow just below low tide. Their upper surface maps the height of the sea gently over decades, like a low table that never quite breaks the surface, always trimmed by the lowest tide. Scientists who work at a restful pace study the stable isotopes in these skeletons and find patterns that match the seasons, revealing the temperature of the water when a band formed. They use simple, careful tools like rulers and soft pencils on waterproof slates, measuring the same colony year after year. It is quiet work, often spent floating for hours over the same patch, noticing small differences that would be invisible to a hurried glance. There is a well-known story about how the grandest forms of reef structure come to be arranged around islands in rings. Picture a young volcano rising from the sea, black rock steaming, surrounded by newly formed shallow waters. Corals settle on that fresh rock and build a fringing reef along its edges. Over long ages, the volcano rests, cools, and very slowly sinks, or the sea very gently rises, while the corals keep pace with growth at the surface, always preferring to stay in their comfortable band of depth with adequate light. The fringing reef becomes a barrier reef with a lagoon behind it, and eventually, if geology and biology intertwined, each moving slowly, each patient. You may notice the reef's air-filled moments when waves bring oxygen to every crevice. During the day, photosynthesis adds to that oxygen, filling the microspaces and making the water near the surface of the colony's tissues feel fresh and sweet. At night, when oxygen is gently consumed by all the breeze, the reef's quiet flow becomes all the more important. New water brushing over the surface renews the supply, and the reef sleeps without worry. Nearby, seagrasses exhale oxygen when the day is bright, and their presence helps set the lagoon's tone, calming the chemistry, offering a slow release of dissolved materials that the reef can welcome. Mangroves at the lagoon's edge cradle juvenile fishes and crustaceans in a sanctuary of roots and leaf-filtered light, another calm sanctuary that feeds the reef with mature residents who return when grown. The coral's patience is mirrored by the creatures that move among them. A clownfish nestles within the tentacles of a sea anemone, its tiny fins moving like a gentle fanning of air on a warm night. Damselfish cultivate small gardens of filamentous algae on the reef, trimming them daily, maintaining their quiet pastures. Sea cucumbers sift sand in slow motion, leaving neat trails of cleaned grains. Feather stars unfurl delicate arms and comb the water for food that passes by, arranging their posture into soft spirals that look like decorative patterns etched in the sea. Everywhere, the reef's inhabitants perform small rituals that add up to a stable life for everyone around them, and each movement adds to the overall softness of the scene. The coral's growth, though slow, is often enough to keep up with sea level changes typical of calm centuries. In warm periods, branching corals may add several centimeters a year, while massive corals thicken by a few millimeters, fine but persistent. In cooler or cloudier times, the pace relaxes. When storms occasionally pass years apart, they may break some branches and scatter pieces across the lagoon. Many of those fragments settle and reattach, creating new colonies that continue the story. Corals have a quiet toughness beneath their soft overlay, and their capacity to rebuild comes not from speed but from the constancy with which they take the sea's gifts and turn them into structure. As with any delicate system, there are times when the balance leans. During especially warm spells, the coral, which loves steady conditions, may part company for a time from some of its symbionts. The tissue appears paler under those conditions, and growth slows, like a sigh that takes a little longer to release. In most gentle cases, when the water cools and the calm returns, the symbiosis re-establishes, and the coral steps back into its routine. The reef has known changes across ages, and while we note them with care, we can also rest with the knowledge that corals have weathered cycles before, often by retreating a bit, conserving energy, and quietly returning to growth when conditions allow. And because the reef is a community, neighbours help by keeping surfaces clean, by providing shade and flow, by drawing down nutrients or adding them coral's microenvironment sets its own parameters, lifting the balance toward carbonate, making aragonite ready to settle. Small proteins and polysaccharides guide nucleation sites, and then the crystals grow, oriented and interlocking, forming fibers and bundles that give a skeleton its texture and strength. This fabric, once laid, is never perfectly uniform. There are little variations in density and porosity that match the rhythm of light and feeding, and the gentle variation is beautiful in its own modest way. If you could smooth a finger along a polished section of skeleton, you would feel the faint ripples of a lifetime's days. From time to time, the reef sends small messages outward. Sound travels well in water, and the reef makes its own gentle music. The snapping shrimp's faint crackle, the far-off hum of fish drumming, the small friction of algae grazers on the crest. Together, they create a soft static that spans a broad range of pitches. Tiny larvae of many creatures use that sound as a guide to find home, navigating toward the comforting shoreward murmur. The reef perfumes the water with chemical cues as well, a blend of microbial exudates and metabolites from algae and animals, which mark out safe places for settlement. These signals are not loud. They sit at the edge of perception, like the faint scent of rain in distant air, but they are enough to guide the next generation. Beyond sight, the reef also shines in ways our human eyes do not naturally see. Some corals produce pigments that absorb high-energy light and re-emit it at longer wavelengths, smoothing out the day's bright edges. This spectral shift helps calm the environment for photosynthesis, and the corals wear it like a quiet shawl. Others embed calcifying centers with a web of organic matrix that remains flexible so that the skeleton can take stress without shattering. The effect is durability achieved through softness, a lesson written in mineral and protein. Imagine resting near a large coral colony that seems as solid as a hill. You notice its surface is not entirely smooth. There are small, meandering grooves and tiny hummocks that catch the light differently as the water moves. Those patterns are microtopography, created by growth and the modest wear of daily life. They are small but significant. They increase surface area, allowing more symbionts to gather light and more area for exchange with the water. They provide microhabitats for little crustaceans that keep surfaces clear. Over the colony's lifespan, those patterns shift as the coral grows, sometimes smoothing over past textures and sometimes deepening grooves, like the quiet reworking of lines on a well-loved object. Growth forms follow certain lines. In branching corals, new branches begin at the tips, in calyces opening like small trumpets. They extend by adding layers to the axial corallite, where growth is fastest, and side branches bud from there, forming a lattice of twigs. The space between branches is carefully maintained, not by a plan written on paper, but by the matching of growth to flow and light. Branches avoid shading each other too much, and they also avoid clumping too thickly. This spacing is a natural result of local interactions. Where light is abundant, growth continues. Where shade deepens, growth pauses. Where flow is directed well, feels right when you look at it from above, like a frozen piece of diffuse lightning or a tree seen through water. Massive corals take another path. They build upward in little steps, each polyp leaving a ridge that will be the foot of the next. Over time, these steps create valleys and hills across the surface, and the colony rises like a rounded dome, with swirls and ribs. Far from being random, these patterns are orderly, echoing symmetry in the polyp skeleton and the directions in which the colony handled wave stress. The body of a large boulder coral becomes a quiet archive of the daily mathematics of currents. Folios, forms, create stacked leaves that ripple gently in the flow, catching soft delivery of nutrients. Encrusting forms trace the contours of the substrate, turning rough edges into smooth, continuous curves, tying disparate shapes into one quiet blanket. Cementation also counts. After storms break fragments, small crustose coralline algae creep over the breaks and glue them to the foundation. Fine particulate cements, including those precipitated by microbial processes in the thin layers between grains, bind weak points. The reef's concrete is made from the same gentle carbonates that corals secrete, but placed by different hands, all equally patient, in a rush, all working day after day and night after night. It will never be finished because the sea is alive, and living places are always in the process of becoming. Through all of this, simple cycles keep time. The sun rises and sets, the tide advances and retreats, the moon waxes and wanes. The seasons turn their wheel, leaning toward warmer months when new growth is invited, then easing toward cooler months when energy goes into maintenance and storage. The corals do not sleep as we do, but their metabolic rates oscillate gently. Their polyps expand and contract with predictable patterns tied to light and flow. Even the symbionts inside them keep daily clocks that harmonize with the outside world, so the entire colonial animal feels like a chorus, gently guided by a conductor who never lacks patience. You might be curious about the small numbers that modulate this world, though we will keep their telling soft. The saturation state, a measure of the readiness of the water to give up aragonite, floats at levels that ease calcification when waters are warmed and buffered by open ocean exchange. The coral's tissue lifts pH within the calcifying space by the placement of protons and bicarbonate, encouraging carbonate ion production. The carbon concentrate is raised to support photosynthesis and to feed the same carbonate balance. It is chemistry played like a slow song, each step taking time, each step following the last, with gentle inevitability. The reef's partners are many. Zooxanthellae, the symbiotic algae, are more than just helpers. They are full partners, with their own small genomes and their own capacity to adapt to conditions. Some types handle warmer water more easily. Others make use of different shades of light. Corals can sometimes exchange symbionts slowly, tuning their partnership to the prevailing conditions. This flexibility can be quiet and gradual. It may take months, and it usually happens best when stress is mild. In those small steps, resilience is is also a place of subtle thermal structure. Thin layers of water at different temperatures slide over each other. During certain nights, cooler, denser water creeps upward from deeper layers along the slope and washes the shallow corals with a breath that feels like the quiet opening of a window in a warm room. These pulses carry nutrients and moderate heat, providing relief and variety. Other nights, the lagoon holds a little warmth, and the water stays like a gentle bath, not too hot, not too cool, just right for the coral's restful tasks. The story of the reef builders is not just about coral animals. It includes many calcifiers, from small single-celled foraminifera that build elaborate shells which eventually become part of the sand, to algae that lay down carbonate plates, to mollusks that smooth their shells by adding layers so thin and regular they feel like satin to the hand. All of these contribute to the greater structure, through life and through the quiet return of their parts to the sediment and the cements. The reef is a cooperative workshop where every participant leaves a trace, and together those traces accumulate into architecture that outlasts individuals by a long, long time. Imagine yourself moving along the slope where the reef transitions to deeper water. The colors change to cooler hues, and the shapes become more delicate as light wanes. In these depths, corals that rely less heavily on harsh midday light thrive. Some of their symbionts make better use of blue light that penetrates further. The polyps may extend longer during the day because the intensity no longer overwhelms. Here, in a mildly twilight world, feeding and building share time evenly. The growth is slower but steady, and there is a sense that patience is amplified in the dimmer sections. Reefs also mark territory with maps of flow called spurs and grooves, wide finger-like projections separated by deep channels that run perpendicular to the shore. Waves move along the spurs and plunge into the grooves, where they funnel seaward. Corals along those spurs are carefully shaped, their skeletons dense, their forms streamlined to the slow, repeating push. In the grooves, larger sediments can move during rare energetic days, but in our quiet moment they lie still and heavy, cushioned by fine sand. Even this pattern of architecture helps share the load of water's energy evenly, allowing the reef to remain calm in its daily life and resilient in those brief episodes when the sea is more insistent. As you continue your float, you may sense the long reach of reef building into human histories, where people have lived alongside reefs, harvesting gently and resting in the shade on beaches built grain by fish and coral. Villages grew in places where reefs made lagoons safe and clear. Boats crossed passes where the spurs and grooves offered navigable channels, and fishers read the subtle colors of water to know where the reef lifted just beneath the surface. Some traditions include quiet rituals of thanks to the reef and of patience when taking from it, learned from living with this stable but sensitive neighbor for generations. The coral's day includes intervals of internal housekeeping that we cannot see. Damaged tissues are repaired. Symbiont densities are modestly tuned. If fine sediments settle on the coral, cilia beat in waves to move particles away, and mucus helps carry them off after they stick for a time. Small mutualists assist, too. Tiny shrimps and crabs that live among the branches pinch away irritants and nip the tentacles of would-be predators that would otherwise cause the coral discomfort. The coral provides shelter in exchange for this cleaning. These little partnerships keep surfaces ready for building and ensure that the colony's energy is spent on growth rather than on constant defense. If you peer along the flat of a reef at extremely low tide in certain places, you may find micro-atolls pressed right against the air, their tops bleached to a pale shade from infrequent exposure, their sides richly alive. These flat tops mark the very upper limit of comfortable living for a coral in that specific place, a precise record that changes only when sea level creeps upward or downward. Over a human lifespan, these changes are subtle, just a few millimeters or centimeters, and the micro-atoll rides along, adjusting so slowly you would hardly notice unless you measured with care year after year. Such patience, pressed into stone, teaches a gentle humility about time. In the life of a reef, harmony is not a static state, but a wave that moves slowly. The reef breathes in energy and breathes out structure. It accepts a little disorder and returns, by building and cementing, toward order. The processes of erosion and accretion are like two soft hands kneading dough. When one presses, the other rests, and when the first relaxes, the second moves quietly forward. In places where water is particularly calm, structure sometimes grows faster, and in places of stronger water, it grows thicker and denser, ready to weather the push. The reef's architecture is a visible solution to a puzzle set by the sea, and that solution is drawn out over slow, drawn-out seconds that make up days, months, and centuries. As the night deepens, phosphorescent plankton may leave small bright streaks in the water if disturbed, and you might see faint blurs where fish or your own hand has moved. The reef itself does not glow like a street of lamps, but it feels alive with light that has been softened, smoothed, and set gently on the creatures that live among the heads and branches. Somewhere in a crevice, a small octopus has changed color and texture to match an encrusted patch of stone, and it rests with half-lidded eyes, breathing so slowly that it almost becomes a statue. A sleeping parrotfish lies wrapped in a thin, transparent cocoon of mucus that the fish made before bedtime, a soft envelope that may hide its scent from nocturnal sniffers. The water continues its quiet movement, and the reef continues its tasks. If you let your attention drift inward and outward with this scene, you might feel your breath synchronize with the water's back and forth. Long, slow inhales, long, slow exhales. Each breath marks a tiny increment of coral building, as if a polyp's pumps took a cue from air in your lungs. The reef accepts this slow pace and does not ask for more. It will be here as light returns, ready to repeat the gentle pattern. Before we float further, let us almost see chloroplasts working like tiny mills, catching the photons and spinning them into chemical bonds. The coral will keep some of this energy for repair and growth. Some will support a new polyp. Some will be saved for the night. At the edges of the reef, the mangroves and seagrasses take on their own morning rhythm. Leaves face the light, and roots exchange gases with the mud. Juvenile fish start their small travels, moving out to feed in the reef's sheltered spaces, then returning to root mazes as the day tilts. This daily migration supports the reef's economy, sustaining a balanced flow of nutrients that the corals and their partners quietly welcome. The entire coastal system is a cradle that carries gifts back and forth, tree to grass to coral and back again. When the water is calm, as it is now, this exchange is particularly smooth. Over months, coral colonies display remarkable constancy in their forms, yet if you track them with patient eyes, you will notice pliancy too. A colony shaded by a newly grown neighbour may thin its plates and angle them slightly to catch more light from above or from the sides. A colony that feels stronger flow may thicken its branch bases. A colony that suffered a small scrape may put energy into tissue regrowth, smoothing over the gap like a careful stitch in a quilt. Environmental gradients in light, flow and nutrients guide architecture, not as heavy dictates, but as hints to which the coral responds in measured ways. In this place, the water's clarity depends on 1,000 small balances. Too much sediment and light dims, shifting energy toward feeding. Too little suspended food, and the night's foraging yields less. Herbivorous fishes keep algal growth on the reef in check, which protects open space for corals to recruit new young. Corals in turn provide the skeleton and crevices where those fish find refuge. The reef's community thus acts as an ever-adjusting assembly that resists extremes and seeks a soft center. In that center, growth is comfortable and accretion proceeds like the slow knitting of a shawl around the shoulders of the sea. Corals are animals, and like us, they sense and respond. They produce gentle nerve-like signals that coordinate polyp responses, telling tentacles to expand or contract, telling cilia to beat more quickly or slowly. The colony acts as a cooperative of many small individuals, and communication is the thin thread that ties them. The result is a colony that seems to move as one, even though it is made of many. The coral can retract its polyps over a region if a little shadow passes, then extend them again when light returns. It can tune the density of symbionts per cell, adjusting to brightness and nutrient availability. These are housekeeping tasks, done without fuss, quietly and effectively. From time to time, small storms in the water bring bursts of plankton, and the corals accept them as small feasts. The tentacles hold, the mouths receive, and the energy flows where it is most needed. After such meals, the coral may calcify a little more quickly for a few days, laying down layers that will later show as faint bands. Over a season, these meals and fasts create a gentle rhythm in the skeleton. Over many seasons, the rhythm becomes a pattern that can be read with care. What reads as science later was just steady living at the time, the reef doing what it always does in the presence of flows and lights that repeat with the calendar. The grand reef architecture arises from countless small efforts, each one a polyp pushing a little more carbonate into place, each one a small algae cell passing a little sugar to its host, each one a tiny ciliated cell moving water molecules along. The living skin of the colony sits atop a mineral city, filled with corridors and small openings that once housed living tissue. As the colony grows upward, older parts may become hollowed or filled by other life. Sponges might take residence, dissolving small chambers in the skeleton. Worms may tunnel slender paths. Bivalves might wedge in and stay, slowly expanding their space. In this way, the reef transforms its inner architecture over time, making the entire framework more complex and in a very gentle way, more resilient to change. Reef organisms share even their stresses in a way. When the day is a bit warmer, feeding might be more robust at night. When light is a bit dimmer, symbionts might become more efficient. When a patch suffers from a small disturbance, neighbouring patches often send propagules, larvae or fragments to recolonize, and corals that once grew under bright light might now develop forms suited to shadier conditions. Experience with change is woven into the reef's design. The long time scales mean that solutions are not hurried, yet they are thorough. Over generations, coral genotypes that handle local idiosyncrasies are favoured, and the reef's overall tapestry becomes well matched to its place. If you close your eyes again, imagine the coral's calcifying space as a very quiet workshop. The tools are not noisy. They are simply proteins and pumps, moving ions in tiny increments. The workshop has rations of carbon dioxide that are hydrated into bicarbonate by enzymes, then nudged along into carbonate where needed. Calcium channels bring positively charged ions, which pair with carbonates and settle as aragonite. The coral carefully keeps hydrogen ions away from the growing surface to prevent dissolution. All this work happens beneath the tissue, in a pocket so thin that a human hair laid over it would be thicker than the space itself. Yet in that thinness, an entire building is born. Symbionts sit in tiny compartments within the coral's cells, and they too have their workshop. Their chloroplasts capture light and send sugars outward to the coral's main body, keeping some for themselves. They adjust to light by moving within cells or by altering their pigment content. Mutual benefit is preserved because both sides keep a balance. The coral supplies nitrogen and phosphorus through feeding and internal recycling, and the algae send carbon-based compounds back. The exchange is so consistent that the coral's tissues often have a remarkable clarity and fortitude, with stable energy supplies day after day. In many places, corals even cloak their symbionts with pigments that serve as gentle optical filters, making the light more diffuse and protecting against the rare, harsh midday brightness. The reef's layout also channels water chemistry. Grooves draw cool water up the slope from depth impulses, particularly when internal waves ride slowly along thermoclines. These quiet arrivals are not visible on the surface, but has a freshness that passes over their surfaces, often at night. Pockets of absorbed carbon dioxide and heat get mixed away, and new water renews the support for calcification. The rhythm of these flows is complex, but it is regular enough that the reef seems to anticipate them. Feeding patterns and tentacle extension often match the timing of such pulses, which the coral senses through the easing of temperature or the small shift of dissolved oxygen. Among the reef's many gentle companions, some of the smallest carry profound roles. Crustose coralline algae help settle new corals by producing chemical signals that say this is a good neighborhood. Sponges filter astounding volumes of water, pulling out tiny particles and returning clear water to the reef, while also generating dissolved nutrients that corals can use. Cyanobacteria on sand flats bind grains together, preventing them from moving too much, which keeps the lagoon floor in place. Even viruses, though they act invisibly, cycle nutrients by gently influencing microbial life, maintaining the balance of the microbial soup that bathes every surface. It is a soft ballet of tiny agents. As the day warms again, a gentle breeze might ripple the surface, casting small patterns of shadow onto the reef. These moving lines are caustics, upwelling and focusing of sunbeams by waves. Corals, beneath experience, flickering light that changes faster than their symbionts' capacity to adjust in the moment. But the pigments and tissue scattering soften these flashes. In fact, this flicker can be beneficial by delivering short bursts of highlight, followed by brief dips, allowing photosynthetic machinery to rest and then function again at a high rate, like a paced breathing exercise for algae. The reef has evolved with this flicker as a background heartbeat, so it takes it as an old familiar. Time stretches. Hours pass like silk slipping over smooth stone. The coral continues, and you continue to float as a soft witness. Somewhere, a large old coral that has grown through lifetimes of local memory stands as a sentinel. It has seen the water clearer and less clear, a few warm years and a few cool ones, the arrival of generations of fish families and their quiet departures. Its upper surfaces are bright and thriving, while its base is occupied by sponges and tiny invertebrates, making full use of the shaded and protected spaces. If you could speak to this coral, it would likely tell you less a story and more a rhythm, a series of rising and falling lines, a constant theme that always returns to the same gentle refrain. There is a comfort in knowing that building with such poise does not require hurry. The coral does not think of deadlines. It thinks in flows and light, in feedings and calms, in the textural feel of the water against its tissue. It proceeds with what is possible each day. It retreats when it must. It recruits new partners when they pass by. It holds the line against dissolving forces with a steady supply of fresh crystals, and it shares its structure. Fish find nests in the elbows of branches. Invertebrates find shade beneath plates. Algae find small runs of current over ridges. And in all of this, the coral receives back the gifts of the community. If you tilt upward, you can see the underside of the surface, a shivering mirror marked by the small dimpled pattern of a light wind. The sky is softened and broken into patches that drift together and apart. You can imagine lying on the beach, hearing the hush of waves that were slowed by this reef, the same waves that offered oxygen and flow to the corals. The connection between water and land is intimate here. The coast is calmer and more welcoming because this entire architecture exists. When reefs are healthy, beaches endure, lagoons remain clear, and fish populations find stable nurseries. The benefits are so quiet that they are easy to miss unless you spend time in slow observation. We might look carefully at a single polyp now and follow it through a single day. In the morning, its symbionts warm to their work. The polyp's body expands, brings its tissue into the best alignment for light, and the pumps that support calcification increase their pace. Midday may bring a slight retraction, a brief rest, followed by a gentle afternoon extension. As twilight falls, tentacles extend fully. There is a pause between day and night, a pocket of stillness, and then the nocturnal feeding begins. The polyp senses small particles, brushes them along cilia, folds them inward. The energy that arrives from the water is turned smoothly into molecules that the polyp stores and uses. The night is quiet. If a predator brushes the surface, the polyp retracts swiftly, then relaxes once the touch passes. In the wee hours, there is slower metabolism, perhaps a slight lull, and then just before dawn, a subtle stirring begins again. The cycle repeats. Now pan out again to a colony level. The living skin covers a mineral skeleton that shows 1,000 tiny cups, each one the home of a polyp. Between these cups lie narrow ridges called septa, like tiny teeth in a crown. These features increase the surface area where the tissue touches its skeleton, making exchange and signaling more efficient. The shapes of the septa and the number per polyp are part of the coral's identity, and to those who learn their forms, they are like a quiet language carved into stone. If a colony grows on a slope, the cups may tilt slightly upslope to catch the light. If the colony occupies a crest, their walls may be thicker to brace against the water's offhand pushes. Patterns in coral communities also carry meaning. In places where herbivores are plentiful, corals often have clearer space around them and more successful recruitment because algae do not overgrow the settlement areas. In places where water flows are particularly consistent, branching corals can dominate, perhaps because they handle this flow gracefully and can grow quickly upward into light, and then the fish community that favors branches becomes stronger, which in turn affects algae and plankton, supporting a loop that favors further coral growth. None of these patterns arrives at once. They are the result of many small acts repeated over years. Within the skeleton, pores and channels allow water to seep slowly. Microbes live inside those spaces and share metabolites with the coral's deeper tissues. The skeleton also reverberates with sound waves and carries these to the polyps, which can sense vibration. So in a way, the coral listens to the reef's song through its bones, through small sensitivities to pressure and flow. This is not drama, but awareness, and it helps the coral anticipate flow and feeding, tighten or relax tissues to reduce drag or to extend structures into welcoming currents. Sometimes corals engage in battles that are not loud, but are nonetheless part of the architecture's shaping. A colony grows and meets another species. Between them, there is a line of contact. Some corals deploy sweeper tentacles to push neighbors back, or slowly grow over them, shading them so that the competitor must retreat. Over years, the line between them moves like a slowly shifting boundary, a coast of stone with creeping tides on either side. The outcome makes complex patterns on the reef floor, mosaics where patches of different species meet and are separated by fine boundaries. And these boundaries often act as microhabitats for other life that takes advantage of the diversity and shelter at the edges. Reef-building corals are often thought of as tropical and warm, and they are, but they also occupy slightly cooler reefs where seasonal cycles are stronger. There, growth pauses more obviously in winter and then accelerates in summer, making stronger bands in the skeleton. The quiet ways are the same. Even in cooler water, the symbiont light harvesting continues at a measured pace, and the night feedings are the same gentle sweep of tentacles. The variety of forms across latitudes is a soft spreading of possibilities, each place home to particular families that succeed in those conditions. Through all this narration, imagine that you are gently hovering in the water, supported as naturally as a leaf floating on a pond. The weight of gravity is softened by buoyancy. The sound of your own heartbeat may seem to match the pops and purrs of the reef. Your breath is steady. The water holds you and cools you lightly. It is easy to linger in this place because nothing insists. The coral continues without demanding attention. It is content to grow in the background of the sea. Over centuries, reefs build enough stone to change the map. They raise islands a little higher, build platforms that widen a coastline, and support cays where seabirds roost, and leave guano that feeds nearby waters with nutrients on a scale that warms the productivity of entire lagoons. In that way, the reef's architecture draws sky and ocean together. Through the birds, nutrients travel from air to sea, and through the corals, carbon passes from dissolved forms into solid forms, and then, sometimes, back again. This is not the center of the coral's awareness, but it is a sense in which their small acts add up to long, slow earthworks. Now let the water carry you to a place where researchers set small sensors and loggers. A delicate instrument measures pH at the surface of a coral, and another instrument gently detects the oxygen concentration just above the tissue. Over a day, the measurements rise and fall like the tide, showing peaks on bright afternoons and dips at night. These traces match the internal rhythm of coral and symbiont. If a tiny change in flow arrives, the graphs shift slightly, showing how intimately the coral is tied to its environment. Other instruments measure how fast corals lay down mineral by tracking their buoyant weight. After months, the increase is All of these measurements are collected quietly, with respect for the reef's calm, and they reveal a portrait of patient building that becomes ever more detailed. Sometimes faint scents in the water mark times and events. During mass spawning, gamete bundles carry compounds that drape the water with a sweet smell, almost like warmed almonds. At other times, the smell of the reef is faintly metallic and clean. These are cues that many organisms can sense and use, and some of them are also the background that helps larvae find their way. The reef is not just a physical structure, it is also a field of chemical information that changes slowly through the day, turning forward and backward with the currents, seeping into crevices and expanding outward like a fog. The art of coral accretion is also the art of patience in a changing world. Corals that persist do so by keeping their routines under different skies. They accommodate light that shifts in angle and intensity across seasonal arcs. They store energy to weather small disruptions. They reproduce both by sexual means, sending larvae into the world to find new homes, and by asexual budding and fragmentation, spreading strong genotypes across the patch. This blending of strategies ensures that the reef always holds both continuity and novelty, enough sameness to carry on, enough variation to adapt. Even the skeleton's internal architecture sometimes changes. Small modifications in crystal size or orientation as a subtle adaptation to different conditions, making the structure slightly more resilient against dissolution or mechanical stress. If you put your hand out, just in your mind, you can imagine the feel of the water pushing gently on your skin as a swell passes. It is cool and silky and welcoming. Your fingertips pass close to the coral, but do not touch it, finding instead the smooth edge of flow where water slides past. The coral prefers not to be touched, and in this imagined space, you let it be. You are content with seeing and knowing. It returns your respect with an unbroken view into its daily life. The fish do not mind you. A small wrasse passes, then doubles back and looks at you, then decides nothing is urgent and swims on. Toward the end of our time here, the light softens again, returning to the tender colors that mark evening. The coral's tentacles extend once more, shape and form falling into place as they have done countless times. Feeding begins gently. The entire reef takes a long breath. The water, carrying warmth accumulated during the day, cools slowly, releasing it into the night sky through the sea's surface. Overhead, stars shimmer and are broken into tiny pieces by ripples, their light drifting down to paint the reef with a fine, ancient dust. There is a deep restfulness in noticing how the reef's tasks require no rush. Building a skeleton requires attention, but not worry. Hosting symbionts requires balance, but not obsession. Feeding requires patience, not pursuit. Maintaining the boundary between colony and neighbor requires firmness, not force. All of these temperate qualities are not just features of reef life. They are quiet instructions that the reef gives to anyone who listens. They say that an enduring structure is built one breath at a time. They They say that partnerships bring stability even though each partner has its own needs. They say that small routines performed consistently can change the shape of an island. In closing, imagine yourself slowly drifting upward, feeling the water become slightly warmer as you approach the surface. The reef recedes beneath you like a simple, beautiful carpet laid gently across the sea floor. Your arms and legs are heavy with calm. Your mind is soft with the cadence of steady building and the delicate shuffle of flow. You come back to your room or your bed with the echo of this underwater quiet in your own breath. There is nothing pressing now. Rest is safe and rest is welcome. If you feel cozy, know that the reef continues its patient work, holding the shore, shaping the lagoon, and making a home for 1,000 gentle lives, all while you sleep. Thank you for spending this tranquil time with me. If this slow drift through coral architecture soothed you, a like and a subscribe helps us keep releasing videos at this mellow pace, and you can set our calm playlist to play softly in the background as you drift off. You are safe